Dorian McCalley had once been applauded by ambassadors, praised by heads of state, and translated speeches that shaped international agreements. But when life turned upside down, he traded stages for a steering wheel and started driving through Chicago's cold streets to support his sick daughter. Invisible to those who judged by appearance, Dorian came to know the weight of humiliation, the silence of swallowed pride, and the coldness in the eyes of people who treated others like they were nothing. Until, on an ordinary day, he accepted a ride and was belittled by a wealthy, arrogant man who had no idea who he was dealing with. What happened next? It's the kind of story you need to watch until the end, because life turns, and sometimes the car that carries someone also carries an unforgettable lesson. In a city that never slows down, not even when your soul is falling apart, Dorian McCalley turned the key in a car that creaked more than it rolled. The worn-out seats, the dashboard patched with tape, and the lingering smell of old coffee told the story of silent years of struggle. It was nighttime in Chicago, and the freezing weather outside matched exactly how he felt inside. Every ride meant another chance to afford his daughter's next treatment. She was battling a rare illness. Dorian had no luxury, no time to dream. Just the wheel, his faith, and a spreadsheet that never balanced by the end of the month. That night, he wore the same old jacket with a broken zipper and those tired eyes of someone who sleeps little and thinks too much. The gas tank was nearly empty. It was one of those nights when it felt like the universe was mocking him. Then his phone buzzed. A premium ride. Name, Brenner Caldwell. Dorian read it twice. That name rings a bell, he thought. No time to figure it out. He accepted the request. Maybe this would be the ride that helped pay the rent. Or maybe, what he didn't know, was that this passenger would change everything. When Brenner stepped into the car, he brought with him an expensive suit and a look of judgment that burned more than the cold wind outside. "This is a premium ride?" he scoffed, slamming the door. Dorian fell silent immediately. Not out of fear, but choice. He knew that kind of humiliation all too well. That kind of disdain didn't need curses. Just a glance. Just the way Brenner wrinkled his nose at the smell in the car, like someone stepping in something dirty. And right there, without knowing it, Brenner had already triggered a lesson he wasn't ready to learn. "I hope you can at least follow the GPS. I don't have time for incompetence tonight," he snapped, typing furiously on his phone. Dorian nodded quietly, turned on the radio, and kept his eyes away from the arrogance behind him. The city lights passed through the windows like an old black and white movie. And inside that car, two opposite worlds collided. The impatient millionaire and the quiet driver, each carrying secrets the other would never guess. During the ride, Brenner talked loudly on the phone with someone named Mr. Markov. Apparently, there was an important meeting at a luxury hotel. "If this deal falls through, you're out." "Got it," he barked. Between threats, he made jokes about drivers. These guys get tips for pretending they have a brain. Dorian took deep breaths. The humiliation dripped through the rearview mirror, but he didn't let a single emotion show. He had learned long ago that silence speaks too, and sometimes it screams. "Did you know people like that wear the same jacket all year long?" Brenner chuckled, glancing at the rearview mirror with a smirk. "You hearing me back there, driver? Everything okay in that head of yours?" Dorian glanced at the traffic light, then down at his hands, and calmly replied, "All good, sir. Just staying focused on the road." His polite tone, instead of calming Brenner down, only seemed to irritate him more. "You're better at driving than talking. Stick to that," Brenner snapped, flashing a grin like he'd just won a battle. Little did he know, he was just started to lose. As the car rolled down Lakeshore Drive, Dorian's mind drifted to his daughter, sleeping at home wrapped in 3 blankets, her medications neatly arranged in a small blue box. That was his fuel, not gasoline, love. And maybe that's why no insult could really shake him. Because when you're carrying someone else's life on your shoulders, you learn to choose your battles wisely. Dorian didn't need to prove himself. Not here, not to someone who talked so much, but listened so little. What Brenner didn't know, and here lies the biggest secret of the night, was that the man driving him had once walked rooms far grander than the one they were headed to. A past more refined than Brenner's own tailored suit. A past Dorian had buried, yes, but never truly lost. like an ember still glowing beneath ash. He had once been much more than someone ferrying others around. And soon, the world around them would remember that, in the most unexpected way. They neared their final destination, a five-star hotel where marble columns and red carpets tried to mask the cold, billion-dollar decisions made inside. Brenner, unaware of the twist awaiting him, adjusted his posture like the world owed him respect. Dorian, eyes fixed on the entrance, took a deep breath. His heart beat differently now, because he knew, once inside that hotel, he would stop being just a driver, and someone, finally, would learn a lesson. The most surprising part, though, the detail that would make anyone's jaw drop, is that night, it wasn't Dorian who needed chance. It was Brenner. And there, on the thin line between arrogance and fate, their roles quietly began to reverse, and no one saw it coming, not yet. As the car moved through the final stretch, Brenner Caldwell remained more focused on being heard than on listening to anything around him. His phone was glued to his ear, his gestures dramatic, his voice loud and sharp, the kind of man used to barking orders and getting what he wanted. I don't care what they said. If the presentation isn't flawless, you're the one who's going to ruin this deal, he shouted, with the coldness of someone who measures people by how useful they are. And there, in that back seat, the millionaire paraded his arrogance, unaware he was about to trip over it. Dorian, meanwhile, kept his eyes on the road and his focus on the mission. Every turn required more self-control than driving skills. The tone of voice, the mocking laughs, the comments about people who were born just to serve cut through the air like blades. And yet, the driver remained composed. He knew some lessons can only be taught by example. And even in silence, he was already teaching. Without realizing it, Brenner wasn't just being driven through the streets of Chicago. He was being led down a path of transformation he never imagined walking. At the end of the call, Brenner let out an impatient sigh and muttered, "These idiots are going to drag me down with them." He looked up at the rearview mirror again and said, sarcastically, "And you back there, all quiet. I bet you don't understand half of what I was saying, do you?" Dorian took a deep breath. He smiled gently and replied, with a voice that walked the line between kindness and firmness, "I understand more than you think, sir." And he went back to driving. That short, polite answer made the silence in the car heavier than ever. But Brenner, unable to handle mirrors that don't flatter him, just laughed. "You seem like a good guy," he said, now in a patronizing tone, as if tossing crumbs of respect after throwing stones. "Keep acting like this, and you might be a manager someday." The words hung in the air like dust that won't settle. Dorian didn't respond, but inside, 1,000 memories lit up. Because yes, he had been a manager. He had led teams, translated for heads of state, sat at tables with ambassadors. And now, driving a man who mocked him, he understood more than ever the power of silence. He carried a secret that, once revealed, would change the direction of that story. In the distance, the lights of the luxury hotel began to appear, reflecting off the car windows. Brenner adjusted his suit, checked his documents, and tossed out one last jab. "I'm guessing you only see places like this from the outside, huh? Probably can't even imagine what it's like in there." Dorian didn't take his eyes off the road, but inside, a chill ran down his spine. Not from fear, from anticipation. He knew every inch of that hotel, every hallway, every meeting room, and not as a guest, but as a key figure in events that man could never even dream of understanding. And right then, without knowing it, Brenner was about to become the audience to his own lesson. "I hope they've got everything ready," the executive muttered, his voice carrying the usual arrogance. "Because if they mess up, I'll tank this deal in seconds." Dorian, who had stayed quiet until now, murmured in a calm, almost prophetic tone, "Sometimes things go exactly the way they're meant to." Brenner didn't understand the comment. Or maybe he pretended not to. Because when someone thinks they're on top, they believe they control even fate. But at that moment, fate was already set, and it was just waiting for them to arrive, so it could play its part with surgical precision. The car made its final turn. The hotel valet was already waiting on the curb. Brenner grabbed his briefcase, adjusted his hair, and made one last remark. Good night, driver. Stay focused. The world needs people who know their place. Dorian parked slowly. The engine's silence felt like the world had paused. Brenner stepped out without a glance back. And in that exact moment, the instant silence took over. The first sign of the twist appeared. A hotel staff member, wearing a gold name badge and a respectful expression, rushed over to the car. Eyes lit up. "Mr. McCalley, what a pleasure to have you with us again," the man said warmly, opening the passenger door with care. Brenner stopped, one foot already inside the lobby, and slowly turned around. The smirk on his face began to melt. He blinked twice, trying to process what was happening. And right then, without knowing, he had crossed the line, from the comfort of mockery to the shock of truth. The secret was beginning to unravel, and the most important lesson of his life was just about to begin. Dorian stepped out of the car calmly, his eyes steady, hands in his coat pockets, and posture firm, like someone who had fought many battles and survived them all. As he walked toward the hotel entrance, flanked by two employees who treated him like a man of great importance, he left behind a frozen figure, a millionaire used to being served, who suddenly realized that maybe he was standing in front of someone far greater than he could ever imagine. The Armitage Hotel lobby glowed like a temple of power. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, velvet drapes. Brenner Caldwell, who had walked halls like these many times, stepped forward with the same confident stride of someone sure of his place in the world. But that night, something fell off. There was a quiet buzz among the staff. Exchanged glances, whispered comments, a subtle shift in attention toward the entrance. Still holding his leather briefcase, Brenner lifted his chin with disdain. "Typical. Must be prepping for some celebrity dinner," he muttered, completely unaware that the name everyone was whispering was the very man he had humiliated just minutes earlier. Dorian McCalley walked into the hotel without hesitation. He didn't take off his worn coat. He didn't flinch under the staring eyes. He didn't slow down. The hotel manager approached with a smile that mixed admiration and respect. "Mr. McCalley, the embassy translators are already in the Aurora room as requested. The space has been set up with soundproof booths and a full multilingual system, just the way you asked." Dorian nodded gracefully, like someone who'd heard this 100 times. And truth be told, he had, because this was a place where he had once been applauded and where, very soon, he would be again. Brenner froze, literally, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, his entire body stiff. It was as if his brain refused to accept what he was seeing. "That man is the interpreter," he stammered to no one in particular. A security guard gently tapped his shoulder and said, "This way, sir. The meeting starts in 5 minutes." He followed like a machine on the fritz, trying to piece together a puzzle that no longer fit his version of reality. The humiliation he thought he had inflicted just hours ago was now staring back at him, a mirror reflecting the very judgment he once cast. In the main conference room, business leaders from around the world waited for the negotiations to begin. Different languages filled the air in formal greetings, layered like music from distant lands. It was the kind of event where a single translation mistake could cost millions. Brenner walked in with tense shoulders and immediately spotted Dorian inside the translation booth, adjusting his headset and microphone with flawless focus. He wasn't just a translator. He was the stabilizer of the entire room, the bridge between worlds, the quiet force that could hold up or completely collapse, the future of that multi-million-dollar deal. One of the Asian representatives pointed to Dorian and said with a smile, "He's translated for our Prime Minister before. We're in excellent hands." Another, European, approached with a respectful nod. "It's always an honor to work with Mr. McCalley, one of the best multilingual interpreters in America." Brenner was sweating. His tailored suit felt tight, his collar suddenly suffocating. And right there, unsure of where to hide his shame, he felt, for the first time, the full weight of his own ignorance. The millionaire who mocked the driver now depended on him not to fail in front of the entire world. Dorian looked at Brenner briefly with a calm expression. There was no resentment, no revenge, just awareness. He knew exactly who he was. He knew what he'd been through. And More than anything, he understood the power of silence. Because sometimes the greatest lesson doesn't come from yelling or payback. It comes from simply being present, from standing tall, whole, after being torn apart. The secret he had protected so carefully now spoke louder than any speech. Brenner, now slumped in his chair, didn't know where to look. Every cruel comment he had made just hours before echoed back at him. I bet you only see places like this from the outside. That line now cut like a blade. The world had flipped upside down, and the man who was used to being the center of attention realized that arrogance was no shield against truth. And the truth in that room was this: the man he had humiliated was the one holding his success in place. The meeting began with formal introductions. Dorian conducted the translations with surgical precision. His voice moved between languages like a carefully choreographed dance: French, German, Japanese, Spanish, Russian. It was like watching a maestro conduct a symphony of business. The investors smiled. The parties understood each other. The once tense atmosphere dissolved into trust. And Brenner sat there frozen, watching his own arrogance unravel in real time. It was hard to accept, but he knew that driver was saving his reputation. In the back of the room, a few hotel staff whispered among themselves. He still has it, doesn't he? That way of calming a room. It's amazing. And one of them added, he didn't have to be here. He chose to be. That says everything. And it really did. Because the most impressive thing about Dorian wasn't just his talent with languages. It was that, even after being humiliated, he still chose to transform the space around him. He wasn't just carrying a secret. He was carrying a lesson, one that was only beginning to be understood. The room had fallen into a respectful silence, as if everyone present, even without realizing, sensed that they were witnessing something far beyond a typical business meeting. It was an orchestra of billion-dollar interests, and Dorian McCalley was conducting each note with flawless precision, never raising his voice. His tone was firm, elegant, charismatic, not a single word out of place. And when cultural nuances created small rifts in understanding, he smoothed them over with clear explanations, simple examples, and just the right metaphors. The representative's eyes lit up. With each sentence he translated, the deal moved closer to a successful close. On the other side of the room, Brenner Caldwell could barely breathe. He felt like a student standing in front of the blackboard, except the lesson was his own arrogance. He watched the man he had dismissed as just a driver, now being met with glances of deep respect. There was no denying it. Dorian had saved the negotiation. He resolved a misunderstanding between the French and Korean delegates that could have tanked the deal. He softened a harsh remark Brenner made that nearly offended the German partner. And he did it all with a class most executives couldn't dream of having. Without even knowing it, Brenner was receiving the most valuable lesson of his life, and it came from the man he thought was beneath him. Midway through the meeting, the company president, a gray-bearded man with a commanding voice, stood up. "Before we sign anything, I need to say something publicly," he announced. The room went silent. All eyes turned to him. This agreement is only happening because of a professional who not only speaks languages, but truly understands people. Then he turned toward the translation booth and, with a grateful smile, said, "Thank you, Mr. McCalley. Your presence here elevated everything to a higher level." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long while, Brenner lowered his head. Dorian nodded in acknowledgement, modestly. There was no vanity in his eyes, only humility. The same humility that led him to work as a driver when the diplomatic market shut its doors on him. The same humility that kept him quiet in the face of humiliation to protect his daughter, his dignity, his peace. He knew things could have gone differently, but he had chosen silence. And now, that silence spoke louder than any bitter comeback. He had won without putting anyone down. That was the real lesson, and this time, even the millionaire got it. After the meeting, while the contracts were being signed and champagne glasses floated around between promises and backslaps, Brenner slowly approached Dorian. Pale, sweating, he looked more like an intern than a seasoned executive. I had no idea," he mumbled, "about who you were." I just didn't see it." Dorian looked at him calmly. There was a quiet light in his eyes. "Most people don't," he replied. Brenner, ashamed, tried to excuse himself. "It was just a bad day. You know how it is." But Dorian cut him off, gently but firmly. "No, I don't. Because even on my worst days, I've never disrespected anyone." Brenner swallowed hard. It stung. Because it was true. Because it was fair. And because it was a lesson he would never forget. "You're right," he finally said, eyes down. "And I'm sorry. Truly." Dorian didn't answer. He just smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from superiority, but from understanding. Because the greatest secret about those who've been humiliated is this: they learn to forgive, even while the wound still burns. And for the one on the other side, that kind of grace can be deeply and painfully transformative. As the meeting came to an end, several guests approached Dorian to compliment him. One of them, with a Russian accent, said, "I've never seen an interpreter so precise and respectful." Another, wearing a colorful suit and speaking with a Spanish accent, joked, "You should teach diplomacy." Each comment was like a small act of justice. Because in that room, full of inflated egos, he had proven that a person's worth isn't defined by their title. It's defined by their conduct, their talent, by how they treat those who have nothing to offer in return. Across the room, Brenner watched it all. For the first time, not in a rush to leave. He didn't want to clap, but he couldn't look away either. That was the greatest lesson he'd ever received. And not from a CEO, not from a Harvard professor, but from a man he once mocked without knowing he was a polyglot, a scholar, and above all, a deeply decent human being. A man who chose integrity over revenge. A man who made him rethink everything, including who he himself really was. And it was there, in the glow of golden lights, between quiet toasts and formal handshakes, that the arrogant millionaire finally understood that losing control can sometimes be life's greatest gift. Because it was only after his fall from grace that he was able to see the ground clearly. And on that ground, he finally recognized the greatness of the man he had tried so hard to ignore. That cold night in Chicago, while the city carried on with its usual rush, Dorian McCalley returned home with no fanfare, no cameras, no trophies. Just the same worn-out car, the same frayed jacket, and a new weight in his chest. The peace of someone who had won, without needing to defeat anyone. His daughter waited for him on the couch, sleepy, her blanket kicked to the floor. "How is it, Daddy?" she asked, her voice still soft. He smiled and replied, "Today I spoke many languages, but I heard what mattered most." Because deep down, that's what it was. He had been heard, even if it came late. At the kitchen table, Dorian opened the small wooden box where he kept envelopes with savings. He placed the night's payment inside. It was a fair amount, generous even, but what really mattered didn't fit in that box. It was the silent respect he had regained, the pride he rebuilt within himself, brick by brick, without stepping on anyone else. And he knew that was rarer than any $1 million bonus. A man's true wealth isn't in his bank account. It's in how he carries himself after he's been torn down. In the days that followed, Dorian returned to driving during his off hours. Still accepted night rides between interpretation jobs. Some passengers recognized him, most didn't, but he never bothered to tell them. The secret about who he truly was made everything feel lighter. "I'd rather be treated for who I am than what I've done," he used to say. And even if the world never knew, there was something magical about it. Because, without realizing, those passengers were riding beside a man who once translated for presidents, and now translated silence into wisdom. As for Brenner Caldwell, he was never the same again. Around the office, people whispered that he'd changed the way he spoke to drivers, receptionists, waiters. That he started carrying thank you cards in his pocket. And that, once, he stopped an elevator just to say thank you to a janitor. No one could explain the shift. But the sharpest minds remembered that, months earlier, he stepped into a simple car and stepped out with his heart completely rearranged. Because sometimes, the biggest lessons in life come disguised as ordinary rides. And the real teacher doesn't wear a name tag. In the building where Dorian lived, neighbors called him the invisible professor. No one really knew what he did for a living, but they saw him leave early, return late, always with books under his arm and kindness in his voice. He didn't need to show off. He knew the most beautiful kind of shine comes from within. And maybe that's why, even the rainy days seemed a little softer when he passed by. An older man from downstairs used to say, "That guy must have been a king somewhere." And in a way, he was right. Over time, the name McCalley started showing up again at international meetings, diplomatic forums, social initiatives. But never as a star, always as the steady hand, the one who showed up quietly, fixed the chaos, and left before the applause. His daughter grew up hearing stories not about wins, but about choices. "Daddy, have you ever been humiliated?" she asked once. He paused for a moment and replied, "Yes. But the most important thing is, I never had to humiliate anyone in return." That answer stayed in her heart as the greatest lesson she would ever learn. One day, Brenner tried to make amends. He sent flowers, a letter, even invited Dorian to dinner. Dorian thanked him and politely declined. Not out of pride, out of boundary. Some doors, once closed, teach more than any apology ever could. And it was true, because forgiveness doesn't require connection. It only requires understanding. And Brenner, he'd already received that understanding, right there in the back seat of an old car. Without knowing it, he had found a mirror, and he never forgot what he saw reflected in it. Word got around among new drivers in the city. Stories about a well-dressed passenger who tipped generously and asked for their names. That's Caldwell, they'd say. He used to be arrogant, but he changed. Some didn't believe it. Seriously? That guy? And the answer was always, yeah. A driver taught him. And just like that, the cycle was complete. Because the true impact of a lesson is when it shows up in how you live. And Brenner, even as a millionaire, started teaching others what he had learned the hard way: respect. In the end, this story isn't just about a driver or a millionaire. It's about all of us, about how often we judge without knowing, about the weight of our words, the value of silence, and the beauty of turning humiliation into wisdom. Dorian McCalley never sought recognition. He only wanted to live with dignity. And he did, not through shouting, but through action, through presence, through soul. He proved that even those who go unseen still shine, and that sometimes the front seat of a simple car holds the biggest secret of all. If this story moved you in any way, give this video a like right now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this. And comment below, where are you watching this story from?